whilst most salespeople feel comfortable dealing with questions, quite a number are more nervous about dealing with objections. The very term objection is, after all, objectionable. The thinking goes like this: if the customer is objecting, then there must be something wrong. And if there's something wrong, then perhaps I've not done the job right, or the customer's decided not to buy from me. But whilst some objections are clearly refusals, many are not. Many objections aren't objections at all. They just sound that way. Let's consider why we might object to something. We've already identified that one reason is that we've decided not to go ahead. But another reason is that we just don't understand what's being suggested. We might have formed an erroneous conclusion. In this case, the objection is useful because it gives the salesperson the chance to identify the misunderstanding and correct it. Another reason people object is that they want to test the idea or the strength of the proposal. And in this case, far from being a bad thing, the objection is a very good thing, because it shows us that the customer is considering how the product or service will work for their organization. In many cases, the buying decision is not taken by one person. Quite often a number of people will be involved, but the salesperson may not meet them all. Not all of these managers will be actual decision makers, but they may have some influence, or at least they want to understand why the purchase decision has been made and why your company has been selected. So in this case, you may find that the customer is simply getting prepared to justify the buying decision. The customer is likely to know what the possible concerns and questions are likely to be, and so will want to get the best answer for them. And who better to ask than you, the salesperson? So in this case, the customer is preparing to justify the reason for selecting you and your company. A very good thing. So we see that objections are not necessarily bad, and in some cases are very good, because they indicate that the customer is not actually objecting, but is rather testing the solution. Let's now go back to the initial type of objection we mentioned, the one which is really a refusal. How shall we best deal with this? If it's something we can deal with, then certainly we should deal with it. But sometimes the objection is just too vague to have any meaning. So if the customer says it's too expensive, or we don't have the time, or we don't have the space, what do we understand by these objections? It's not at all clear, because the objections are just vague. In the first case, we don't know what the comparison is. Too expensive compared to what? In the second case, the objection makes no sense. Not enough time. We all have the same amount of time. 24 hours in a day, you can't get any more. And in the final case, not enough space. Well, again, you must have some space. So the issue really is, what are you doing with it? So we can't deal with some objections because they're too vague. And so we have to make them specific. And the only way to do this is to ask some questions. Too expensive compared with what? What takes up most of your time currently? How do you decide how to allocate the space you currently have? And so on. We need to get clarity about what exactly the customer is concerned about, and then we can deal with the issue. But before we can deal with it, we have to ensure the objection is a real objection. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes people don't want to tell us the real objection. It might be they're just embarrassed. For example, they may not have the authority which they previously claimed, or maybe they've been demoted or lost some power. Instead of telling us that they're not quite as important, they prefer to offer us a false objection to put us off. Or maybe they don't understand, but they don't want to admit or look foolish. Or it may be they're just having a bad day and they don't want to talk about it right now. So if you suspect that the objection is not genuine, you need to test it. Now, if the other person doesn't want to talk, well, then it's best not to talk. Come back another time. But otherwise, you can test the objection easily by suggesting that we ignore it or discount it just for the moment, and ask the customer if we could go ahead if the objection raised were to go away. If the objection is real, then the customer should agree that, in this case, we would be able to go ahead. But if the objection is false, then the customer will immediately raise another objection. So it works like this. I hear an objection, something simple like, I don't like that colour. I test it by asking, if we could supply it in other colours, would you want to go ahead? If the objection's real, the customer really doesn't like the colour, then the customer should agree that we could go ahead if the colour issue could be resolved. But if it's false, then the customer's likely to offer another objection why the solution is not acceptable, in which case there's no point in discussing colour because colour isn't a real objection. Let's see how this can work in a role play. We'll join the role play just after the salesperson has delivered the sales presentation.
That's really quite expensive.
Compared with what?
Well, compared with our current supplier.
Does your current supplier also provide full maintenance and service?
No, that comes at an extra cost.
Well, for us, it is all included, so actually you'll be getting better value.
Okay. I can foresee that there might be some issues with integration. I don't know how our IT department will feel.
What are their concerns specifically?
Well, I imagine it's the time it's going to take for the integration process to happen.
Well, you can tell them that they won't need to devote any time at all to it because our system is fully compatible. And if there are any issues, we'll resolve it.
Okay, brilliant. Look, I don't really like the payment terms you're proposing.
Is that the only thing that's preventing you from going ahead?
Yeah, I guess so.
So if we resolve it between us, we can proceed?
Yep, yes, I suppose so.
So we see the salesperson dealing with a variety of objections. In the first case, the customer didn't properly understand the proposal. In the second case, the customer wants to ensure that there were answers ready to deal with the possible IT objections. And in the third case, the salesperson wants to ensure that this was a genuine issue before addressing it. So now I'll leave you to consider how best to deal with objections in your next sales meeting.